Hello and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Robert Berend, and we're going to do a 2-hour talk on the history, life, effect, influence, long-term echoes into the future about the Grateful Dead. Today is April 28th, 2021. It's a pleasure to see all of you. We have some special guests. We have Dennis McNally, who was the publicist for the Grateful Dead for 22 years. His wife was also one of the photographers for the Grateful Dead. Dennis will be joining us for about an hour and talking about his time and experiences with the Dead and giving us insight. We have Wendy Garf-Lipp, who saw the Dead, no doubt countless times, but also we'll talk in particular about her time seeing the Grateful Dead in Egypt, which was one of their memorable concert gigs outside of the US. I have been a fan of the Dead since around 1970. I remember buying Working Man's Dead for a friend of mine for his birthday when we were young teens. And I've only seen the Dead about 5 or 6 times in some of their incarnations. Dead and Company, 5 times, 10 times, who can remember, am I right? So I'm teaching this class because it's something of interest to me. I recently taught a 2-hour course on everything about Jimi Hendrix, which is also available on YouTube, as this will also be on YouTube, as you can tell. So let me briefly introduce Dennis McNally as he comes back with his cup of coffee, visiting us from San Francisco graciously. Let me say thank you also to Joel Selvin. Joel Selvin was the music critic for the San Francisco Chronicle for a number of years. And I reached out to him and he agreed to talk, but a business thing came up, so he had to be out of town. I said, can you recommend anyone else for me to talk with? And I got an email from Dennis saying, sure. So that's the Grateful Dead spirit of community. And I appreciate you, Joel, for that. Joel has written, I think, 29 books on music. One book he wrote was called The Summer of Love, which I have, which is a great book. So you can look up Joel Selvin. Dennis McNally here got his PhD at Amherst, and he has written, his main book on the Grateful Dead is What a Long Strange Trip It's Been, A Long Strange Trip. And it's all about his 22 years with the Dead. It's an inside the history of the Grateful Dead. He's also written the first book, biography on Jack Kerouac. And as I begin my intro, Kerouac, Kesey, CIA, the Palo Alto Veterans Administration Hospital, all these things and the time and the zeitgeist of those days helped bring the Dead into reality. We can use that word loosely with this crowd. And thank you. And I'll do the background on the changes of the times from the Beats and the Beatniks to drug awareness. One story just to say so I don't forget it, because I have a lot of stories running around my brain. Sometimes when the Palo Alto VA was giving drugs to the various experimenters to see what's the effect of these drugs, they were giving them LSD and psilocybin and mescaline. I promise you, one of the countless things I've been reading on the Dead said that he'd be tripping, and the scientist, who did not do any tripping apparently, Kesey would say, yeah, I'm not feeling anything, doc. And he, as the guy's face would be melting, and then he'd just leave the VA tripping and go have a nice sunny afternoon in Palo Alto. So Dennis, because you wrote a book on Kerouac, you are cordially invited to correct me, but let's see how I do with my tale of integrating all this stuff. So I guess let's start with Ken Kesey, but I could spin the wheel anywhere. So Kesey created the Merry Pranksters, which was a group of about 14 or so men and women. He was born in 1935, died in 2001. He joined the creative Stanford Writers Group in 1958, where he worked on his book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He almost made it to the Olympics as a wrestler in 1960, but not quite. Some of the other people in the Wallace Stegner Stanford Creative Writing Group were Larry McMurtry, who just died earlier this year, about a month ago or so in 2021. And I saw his name as people who were involved with the Trips festivals where much LSD was consumed. And I thought McMurtry rings a bell. So actually his son's name rings a bell because he's like a folk country singer. But Larry McMurtry wrote Lonesome Dove and a few other works that you might know. So he started transitioning the beats into the 60s. Edward Abbey was also one of the people in the writing group. I think he wrote the Monkey Wrench Gang. So Kesey was getting paid $75, which was a lot of money back in the 60 or so, by the CIA, ostensibly through the doctors at the Palo Alto Veterans Administration. Stanford University is where Palo Alto is located in Palo Alto. And Palo Alto, Menlo Park are adjacent towns. So he was taking acid in 1960 or 1961, depending on what year I'm reading. There's a lot of conflict in what I'm reading, a little bit here and there on the dates, but not that crucial these days. But I just find it interesting that there's some disagreement. So he wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was published in 1962. And as you know, it won several Academy Awards with Jack Nicholson as a movie when that came out. He apparently wrote the first 3 pages of Cuckoo's Nest while he was on peyote. He also had electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock, given to him in order to better understand what it was like to actually have the experience. That's quite getting deep into it. The film won 6 Academy Awards when it came out in 1975. He bought a property with the money from Cuckoo's Nest near San Francisco in a small town called La Honda, which is quiet and rustic. And there, with the merry pranksters and pretty much opening the door to anybody who could find their way there, he just let people show up and do what they would do. LSD was legal in California, and I suppose federally, until October 6th, 1966. And when I was thinking about running this class, I thought, like, do I need to talk about LSD and hallucinogens this much? And now, having done 100+ hours of research, yes, hallucinogens were integral to all this. So he had the property in La Honda, and there was tons of LSD, original LSD from the Sandoz labs. And also in high school, he was voted most likely to succeed. Before he moved to La Honda, he lived on a street called Perry Lane, which was quite the crucible for liberal thinking and drug experimenting and creative types. The young Jerry Garcia was the founder and lead inspiration of the Grateful Dead, was a bit too young to get the, sure, just come on in and explore with us, but he knew what was going on in Perry Lane. Kesey said that the LSD and psilocybin and other tests they were doing at the VA was, he said, like sending kids to explore a haunted house and then report back. He liked LSD and he liked mind expansion. He also got a job later as a night aide at the psychiatric ward at the VA hospital in order to do a better job of writing Cuckoo's Nest. Kesey was a friend of Jack Kerouac, and Kerouac was the writer of The Dharma Bums and On the Road. My father had both of those books, and unfortunately, we never spent a minute discussing Kerouac. I can only wonder what the influence was on my dad. So Kesey is a friend of Kerouac, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Tim Leary, Allen Ginsberg. In an interview with Stanford Magazine, he said that he hoped to stop the coming end of the world. He was a vocal proponent of LSD, probably the #2 guy in the United States popularizing hallucinogens after Tim Leary, also known as Kindly Dr. Tim on the Firesign Theater albums. La Honda, south of San Francisco near Santa Cruz. Kesey also turned the Hells Angels onto LSD. And this is also where Allen Ginsberg wrote a poem about the Angels doing acid with Kesey. And people would come over, have his venison chili that was spiked with LSD and know that it had LSD, and music and mayhem and merriment happened. One of the other pranksters was a guy named oh, come on. Ken Babbs. So Ken Babbs is walking through the darkness over to Ken Kesey's, house in the woods, and they go, who is there? And he says, it is I, with my merry band of pranksters, and that allegedly is how the term merry pranksters came about. So then we have Jack Kerouac, who was born in 1922 in Lowell, Massachusetts. Kerouac didn't speak English until he was 6 because his parents were French Canadian. So for all the great authorship he did, he was English second language. The poem Howl by Ginsberg is dedicated to Neal Cassady, and Neal Cassady is transmogrified in the book On the Road by Kerouac, which was written in 1957. On the road basically means move. So keeping that move, ecstasy, spontaneity, commune living together, they bought a 1939 bus, which was painted in psychedelic colors, and the name of the bus was Further, F-U-R-T-H-U-R. After Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead died in 1995, one of the spin-off bands of the Dead was called Further as well. Further is also, this whole time is also discussed at great length in Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test book of 1968. So in 64, a bunch of the pranksters, Neal Cassady with Neal Cassady at the wheel, and Neal Cassady apparently was quite the speedy guy and the main driver, who was raised in flop houses with an alcoholic father, got into trouble with stolen cars, similar to the early life of Jimi Hendrix. But Neal Cassady was reading Marcel Proust and philosophy, and when he got married at an early age, and in New York, he met Jack Kerouac. So all these people coalesced to be a circle of friends doing hallucinogens and broadening their horizons. So in 1964, they took the bus Further, drove from the San Francisco area to New York, and they went over to Millbrook, where Tim Leary was doing thoughtful, deep thought experimenting with LSD. The pranksters showed up, lit a smoke bomb in the driveway. This did not entertain Leary and his friends. They did not get off to a good start, but eventually things were smoothed out. Other friends of Neal Cassady, who was the main character in On the Road, was modeled after Neal Cassady. So Cassady died in 1968 in Mexico. Cassady was also a friend of people like Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs, and these people begat the Beat generation. He was busted for possession of pot and served 2 years in San Quentin, and period on that. So the pranksters included Mountain Girl, who later became Mrs. Jerry Garcia, Stuart Brand, who was born in 1938, who's still around, and Stuart Brand started the Whole Earth catalog that probably all of you will remember, very big, back to Living Off the Grid book from 1971. There's a conflict of whether or not, as they took their bus trip to the New York World's Fair in 1964, if they were giving pot and acid and speed and turning on lots of people on the road or not. Kerouac referred to the US as a soulless prison. And an important side note, because Lord knows I have a ton of stuff to say, but I'll be wrapping up soon for Dennis. This psychedelic bus, when the Beatles did Magical Mystery Tour, which was a movie that had the Bonzo Dog Band performing in it, they also took a psychedelic bus and went around England, no doubt modeled after the Further bus, because Kesey had turned the Beatles on to acid. Also, the Who's Magic Bus, also a psychedelic bus, and no doubt heavily linked to Kesey and the pranksters. Some of the pranksters in '69 went to Woodstock without Kesey. They also went to the Texas Pop Festival. One of the members was Hugh Romney, who B.B. King said, "Man, you look like Wavy Gravy." So that is how Hugh Romney became Wavy Gravy, which of course became a Ben and Jerry ice cream, as did Jerry Garcia ice cream. Kerouac said, "I have nothing to offer anybody except my own confusion." And with that, I'll put a period at the end of my paragraph. Go ahead, I am welcoming and with great honor and thanks to you for being a great guy, Dennis McNally, I'll mute myself. Take it away, Dennis McNally.
I should start talking, I shouldn't be the classic old person and not, not unmute myself and have everybody yelling, mute, mute, hello, nice to see you all. Even those of you who are cheating and just putting up icons and names. I'm going to make a couple of observations, and Robert, don't think of them as criticisms, but I want to correct a couple of things, mostly in the context of, I think you put an enormous amount of information into a very short thing. And since this is the information that I've been living with, I guess since 1972, when I went to my first Grateful Dead concert, and and then started picking up, well, and in the same year started studying the life of Jack Kerouac. So that's 50 years ago, and I've been studying all this, what you just said in 10 minutes, I've been studying for like the last 50 years with extras. So let me make two observations. One is that Kesey wasn't a friend of Kerouac's. They met only once. In 1964, when the Magic Bus got to New York City, and the ostensible reason was they were going to go to the World's Fair. That was the excuse. The reality was they just were out for an adventure. And if you do enough acid, it's all an adventure. They ended up in somebody's very fancy, one of their friends from Penn Lane had a friend, I forget what the connection was, very elegant apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And Neil went out to Long Island, where Kerouac was living, and brought him to the party. Except that, Kerouac was an alcoholic, and everybody in the room is tripping their socks off and running around and being, sort of delightfully crazy if you could plug into the atmosphere. And one of the things they did was they were using an American flag as a tablecloth, or not a tablecloth, but like a spread on top of a couch. And this disturbed him because, this is an immigrant child who was still really very, in many ways, very conservative. And a lot of what was attributed to him was more a comment on the conservatism of the 50s when On the Road came out than it was who he was. I'll say parenthetically that if there was anybody on the planet that was not equipped to become instantly famous, it was Kerouac, who was sensitive and deeply, deeply sort of thoughtful. And the essence of fame is people thinking that they know who you are, and they don't know who you are. And he is, the only way he could cope with all that was to crawl into a bottle, except where he had been drinking wine, now he had the money to buy Johnny Walker Scotch, and at a bottle a day, that sort of cut his lifespan down at that point to what, 12 years from fame to death. But at any rate, and Kesey always felt bad that rather than try and get Kerouac into their somewhat crazed scene, that he and Neil, for instance, just the two of them quietly didn't go out and sort of meet Jack on his own ground. And it might have been, a far better thing. It would have been, because as it was just sort of a waste of everyone's time. The other little correction is simply that B.B. King did not give Wavy that name. Wavy, after Woodstock, his group of friends, which was called the Hog Farm, at Woodstock, they had fed people, right? So they had this they suddenly have credentials, work credentials as a support team for rock concerts, big rock concerts, festivals. And so they had been brought into the Texas festival, and they were there. And somewhere in the process of that, Wavy got really, really, really high. And he was on the stage because he was supposed to be the MC and the voice, the mouth, uh, and he was quite incapable of doing that. And he was literally sitting on his butt on the stage, mumbling "Wavy, wavy, wavy, wavy." At which point, BB King looked at him and said, "We can work around you, Wavy Gravy," and proceeded to play the show with Wavy sitting there going. So that's how he got his name. Um, Quite a wonderful man to this day. Let me talk about the Grateful Dead. There's a. I'm going to start with sort of two pivots, and one of them is really quite remarkable because it's, I dare say, absolutely unique in pretty much in kind of in the history of music. So, and that is this. It's usually referred to as the romantic paradigm, and why it's romantic, I'm not so sure. But anyway, and that is simply this: if you start playing music and you get skilled and you decide that you're good enough to perform in front of other people, you develop and you hopefully get to where you're making a music that people want to hear, and they pay money, and you're up there on the stage and they're down there in the audience. It is a performance situation. And that is, you make the music, they respond with applause, and they sort of, you give them the art and they respect it. And that's normal. And that's whether, believe it or not, I mean, if you're a punk band and you're spitting on your audience, you're still up there getting the money because, you have the gift, and your audience, even if it's spitting back, respects what you're doing. And that's certainly true with the classical world, or, Indian classical, whatever. The Grateful Dead experienced something that's really genuinely unique. And it wasn't just that they played music at times while consuming experiencing LSD. Jimi Hendrix certainly tripped his sock. I just read recently that he had probably done about 5 times normal at Monterey Pop, which was his introduction to America. He had gone to, he'd played in he was sideman in a lot of bands. You probably heard all this from Robert in the previous lecture, but gone to England, comes back. His introduction to America is at the Monterey Pop Festival. I might add, there was him, and then the Grateful Dead, poor things, and then, the Who destroyed the stage, destroyed the instruments, and then the Grateful Dead, and then Jimi Hendrix, who burned his guitar, which is why nobody ever remembers that the Grateful Dead actually played at Monterey Pop, because they played music and they had no show. They never did have a show. But I'll get to the reasons there are reasons for that.
Dennis, if I may, it occurs to me, because I wanted to stop talking so you could talk. So please, if you would cover, because I forgot to say how all this Keezy acid prankster stuff had anything to do with the acid test and the Grateful Dead showing up as a band. I forgot that.
And I will cover that. That's not a problem. So the Grateful Dead had an experience. Actually, I was about to cover that. The Grateful Dead had an experience which is completely unique, and I'm pretty sure I can argue that persuasively, and that is this. So, just a little bit of backstory. Keezy goes to New York. They come back. He writes his and publishes his second book, Sometimes a Great Notion, and he decides to become a prophet to a not entirely verbal, the way Leary was, a non-verbal prophet of LSD. And they start throwing these parties, which came to be called acid tests, as in, can you pass the acid test? And these parties would simply consist of getting people to in a space. The first one was in somebody's house. The second one was in a small club. Third one was in a community center. And over the course of 2 months, they did 7 or 8 acid tests. And later they did a couple more down in Los Angeles, but primarily 7 or 8 acid tests around the Bay Area. And all it consisted of was giving everyone access to LSD. If you wanted, there was Kool-Aid, drank the Kool-Aid. Thus the expression, they drank the Kool-Aid. And these young people, these young musicians that they knew, who were then called the Warlocks, and then just as they started, had changed their name to the Grateful Dead, played or didn't play, depending on how they felt. There's one famous event in which, at least at some point in the evening, the drummer decided that his drum set needed to be reset up and spent the rest of the night taking it down and putting it back up as though he were, a 5-year-old with a particularly interesting puzzle. Well, without him, they couldn't play. So the point is, they weren't the show. The show was everything that was going on in the room. And I do mean everything. And for instance, people were given fluorescent chalk and people would be wandering around chalking things on the walls. They might or might not dance. They were face paints, whatever. And also the pranksters had by courtesy, you could call it a band. None of them could play instruments, so it wasn't much of a band that you would, or I would probably want to hear. And they would bang on things. There were endless mic, the room was sort of wired so that there would be mics. And to quote Jerry Garcia, it was like the strangest things would happen at acid test. The power cords would seem to be writhing and squirming. You can sort of guess where that was coming from. You would say something and there were all these delays. So you'd say something into a microphone and it would come out a minute later over there, etc. So, it was as weird as it, but weird is not necessarily a bad adjective, certainly not in this group of people. And it was as weird as it could possibly get. So from November of 1965 to January of 1966, over the course of, it was late November, pretty much 2 months, they had these events. And the Grateful Dead experienced a situation in which they were not the show. The show was everything in the room. If they could manage it, they were the soundtrack, and they usually were the soundtrack. And they had a really good time. But it was a fundamental experience in which they discovered that their so-called audience, and it lasted for the next 30 years, their so-called audience wasn't a passive receiver of their great artistic gifts, but they were partners in a quest. The direction of the quest was not always clear to them or anybody else, but it was a quest. And they proceeded to feel that paradigm, even when they were clearly the show, and they were selling tickets to 50,000 people at Giant Stadium or, Foxborough. And you would think superficially that they were, they were stars. Heaven spare us. Certainly, they never thought of it in that way. So this has consequences. When you don't think of what you're doing as a performance in the way that you ordinarily would, what you come to realize is that the music they were making was not theater in the normal sense, which when they started was, of course, 3-minute songs, right? And hooks and all the stuff that the music business expects of you, including visuals, right? What visuals? There were a bunch of homely guys or unusual looking guys. Bob Weir wasn't homely, but he was so, and at least when he was very young, he was so androgynous that it was he was kind of a little ahead of his time. No dance moves, no theater, no visuals, my dear sister came with me to what was in fact a fantastic Grateful Dead show in 1974 in Springfield. And she was an enormous David Bowie fan at the time, who was doing, this Diamond Dogs and, amazing theatrical spectacles. And when we came out of the show, I basically said, "So what did you think?" I think it was her first show. And she said, "Well, they don't have much visual going on." And they had just seen we had just seen a fairly remarkable performance from the band. They were really astonishing. And I was like, I got to admit, I was somewhat perturbed that she would worry, "Oh, well, Bowie does the visual." Yeah. Anyway, the point being that there's no sense of theater. Now, when you have theater, you have rehearsal, you have a vision of what it's supposed to be. If you're the Grateful Dead, it's what it is that night. There is no supposed to be. So, every night is different. Again, unique. I mean, Keith Moon, the Grateful Dead played two nights in 1976 with The Who. And afterward, they were sitting around with Mooney, and he said, "You guys played a completely different set tonight, on the second night." And they said, "Yeah, that's," and Moon said, "We've played the same set for the last 10 years," or words to that effect. So the point, it's literally true. The Grateful Dead never played the same set twice, and never played their songs the same way twice. Because the other essential fact about the Grateful Dead was called improvisation. Now, almost every band, there are bands that literally are trying to play it note for note the same way every time. But say the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards is going to take a solo every night, and it's going to be a little different. But the fact is that, for instance, Charlie and Wyman, or whoever's playing bass, are not improvising. They are laying down a groove, hopefully the same way every night, to give the soloists an opportunity to, show off. In the Grateful Dead, and it was the first time in music history, everybody improvised, so that it was going to be now they had to listen to each other. And I might add, when David Freiberg, who was in a band called, among other things, Quicksilver Messenger Service, and later the Jefferson Starship, once said, "I love the Grateful Dead. Nobody else will jump off a cliff." Now, sometimes if you jump off a cliff, you fly, and sometimes they did fly. And lots of the time you jump off a cliff and you end up on the rocks below. They did that too. Eventually, they certainly got to the point where they could mostly, fly at least a little bit, and sometimes spectacularly. But the point is that they approached improvisation. The only other musicians that approached improvisation with quite the enthusiasm, shall we say, that the Grateful Dead did, was the early New Orleans, the musicians that started jazz. Now, very quickly, with Louis Armstrong, because he was such a genius, jazz became a music of soloists. And again, where everybody was not improvising, they were establishing a platform for Lewis to solo off of. You just, you couldn't deny genius. But with the Grateful Dead, there was an attempt for everybody to play differently every time, and that's unique. So that also results in, God, I just heard a wonderful, hilarious punk song somebody sent me called "Bring Me the Head of Jerry Garcia." That's the first line. The second line is, "He plays with a lot of notes like it's diarrhea," which cracked me up and would have cracked Jerry up. Oh, he would have loved that. The point is that all of this adds up to something else Jerry said, which is the Deadheads, the people who like the Grateful Dead, are like people who like licorice. Not everybody likes licorice, but the people who like licorice really like licorice. And that was true of the Grateful Dead. There is a certain segment of the population that is going to appreciate what the Grateful Dead were doing, which was deep and wild improvisation. For example, there was a night where my normal place, from 1984 to 1995, I was the publicist, and one of my primary jobs at the show was to the area right in front of the stage is called the pit, and that's where photographers got to go, and that was my home, and I'd be standing down there, and in the second set, when they tended to become much more, they warmed up in the first set, and then by the second set they they'd go out there, they go roaming the galaxy, and I was sitting there, and they came out of some other song, and they were what any critic that didn't like the Grateful Dead would say, oh, they were just noodling around. Because what happened was that Garcia slowly started playing the song Stir It Up, the reggae song. The rest of the band didn't know it. They had to figure out what was going on. And what happened was that they sort of played it over and over and never did finish it and never did play it very well, because it was sort of an improv, it was totally an improvisational stab. The audience went bananas. The audience went bananas because what they saw was something completely new, something utterly original. Now, by and large, the audiences at rock concerts do not want new and original. They want to hear the song they heard on the radio played, recognizably. And that's the difference between the average music fan and Deadheads, who actually appreciated the idea that they were going to hear something. Particularly, there's a part of every Grateful Dead concert, at least in the last 10, 15 years of the band's existence, called Space. The rest of the musicians would leave the stage. The drummers would make boom boom for 10 or 15 minutes. And then then the guitarists would come back, sometimes only one of them, sometimes all of them, and they would make strange sounds. And that was truly, truly, truly different every night. Now, most people, this is music without, that's completely atonal, it's completely arrhythmic, it's all the elements that normal people think of as music, which is to say, rhythm, swing, etc. This music lacked all that. It was an exploration that was of sound, of pure sound, that had, and if you were a fan of John Coltrane in 1961, well, then you could get what the Grateful Dead were up to. And frankly, that's to some extent where they got it. He was certainly he was the fundamental reason, that their model for why they decided to get, into weird improvisation. But generally speaking, the average American, or anybody in the world, music fan is not, this is not the kind of stuff that's really appealing. So that's, so improvisation and the idea that they're not the show. And all that implies, which gets real, you can take that a long way, are the two sort of, ultimate characteristics of the Grateful Dead that I want to talk about. And I want to talk about two other things, and sort of lead up to Wendy and Egypt. So don't leave on me, Wendy. And that is this: the Grateful Dead did two things. One was the improvisation, and the approach, a completely different approach to music. The other was that, and Jerry spent most of his life trying to duck responsibility for anything. But one of the things in particular was the whole creation of Deadheads. And he had a point about that. They were committed to those other people. They saw them as partners, and they did a lot of things in terms of the business of running a concert, of who they worked with and what they told the promoters, who had the job of, setting up the stage and setting up the, stuff, doing the business, the food, the, whatever, the security. And we chose very carefully, who those people were, and we worked with them for a long, long time. For example, there was a famous case in which a guy, well, he was the fall guy. There was in Philadelphia, the federal grand jury investigated corruption in the concert industry and discovered that they'd padded their books and they'd stolen us blind at a specific giant concert at JFK Stadium, where they used to have the Army Navy game back when we were kids. It no longer exists. They offered up a stage man, one of their medium level employees, poor old Sid, as the sacrificial victim, and he had to. I think he spent some time in jail, and then he had to wear a bracelet for quite a while, which was a joke because, of course, it wasn't just him, but for whatever reason, the bosses, the owners of the company, had better lawyers or whatever, and managed to beat the rap. And we still worked with those people. And a friend of mine in the business said, "How can you keep working? They stole from you. How can you keep working with them?" And we said, "Listen, they do what we tell them to do in terms of the way they treat the audience and the way they deliver, what we want. We expect them to steal from us. You all steal from us. Remember, we did half our concerts with Bill Graham. He stole from us every night." Now, in Bill Graham's case, it was also true that we're talking about a man who had fled the Holocaust, walked across Europe to get to America. And it wasn't, I worked for Bill at one point, and there was an expression at Bill Graham Presents, which was, "It's not the money, it's the money." By which I mean, it wasn't having money or having more money. Money was the way you kept score. And Bill had a desperate need as a Holocaust victim, frankly, to prove that he was smarter than you. So he had to chisel, even though it blew up when he was the promoter of the Rolling Stones. He offered, and Mick Jagger accepted, a way for Mick to make a little, not that they weren't making oceans of money already, for Mick to make a little extra. And Mick took the deal and then decided the bill was burning him too, which is why that was the last time Bill got to promote the Rolling Stones. That was Bill's, sort of emotional problem. And it was more an emotional problem than sort of corruption in the way that we tend to think of it. But that was the point, was he also delivered the best security, the best food, the best ambiance for our audience and for us. And we regarded the chiseling as the price you have to pay for good service. So that was the Grateful Dead. And I bring this, I've gotten distracted with the corruption stories, which people generally sort of are interested in. But the fact is that the Grateful Dead developed this relationship with this audience. And then because they were you'll pardon this inherent sexism of this, the last man standing, the last band standing of the great San Francisco scene of the 60s, they received they came to represent everything about San Francisco in the 60s, which is to say freedom, joy, flowers in your hair, psychedelics, freedom of sexuality, whatever. And what it turned into by the 80s, when it was becoming this enormous phenomenon, was maybe the realest community in America. If you were a Deadhead and found yourself in a city where you knew no one, and there was about to be a Grateful Dead concert in that city, and you somehow managed to get a ticket and you charged in, and you didn't know one person in the building, you'd know 50 by the end of the night, just by talking, by being made welcome, by being, by everyone there understanding that that you could do anything you wanted so long as you didn't violate other people's space and time. I went to 1,000 shows, okay, but now 900 of them or 1,100 of them, I guess, and 900 of them don't count, my friends tell me, because I was paid to do that, and so that's cheating. But I went to 200 shows before I got the job. In all that time, I got into a conflict once with another person. And that was a particularly unusual woman who, when she danced, she would emit these very loud neighing sounds. She sounded like a horse. Loud, I mean, really loud. And she was right in front of me, one night. And this went on for an entire set. And at the end of the set, I hated doing it because I violated the code. But the fact was, she was interfering with my concert. And I finally said, "Listen, you're going to have to leave." She looked at me, "What?" I said, "I can't hear them for you. You have to go." And she sort of, snarled, but eventually left. And everybody around us gave me a round of applause but the point being that she was as annoying to them as to me, but none of them was going to do what I did because she violated the code by disturbing us, but what I did wasn't cool, except that I just, it was either that or I left, one or the other, but I was sick of listening to her. And that's, I don't know how I can, how more, well, Wendy can talk about it. But the community amongst Deadheads was and is, and I'll finish with a short disquisition on the goddamnedest thing about the Grateful Dead is that Jerry Garcia died 25 years ago, 6, and there are more Deadheads now than there were then. And they have I'm talking about 18-year-old kids who were, conceived 7 years after Jerry died. and they're exactly the same attitude. They understand what the Grateful Dead is supposed to be about, even though they don't listen to the Grateful Dead. They listen to because it's the music, not the band, and they understand them. And all this happened. Grateful Dead did a 50th anniversary celebration called Fare Thee Well in 2015. And I thought, I'm such an expert, right? I thought, well, it's all going to go away because everything goes away. This is the way of the world. No, it just reignited. There are 5 dead cover bands in every city in America, and the people who go to these little bars, say, to see a dead cover band, are doing exactly the same thing that we did in front of the Grateful Dead, feeling the same things. Obviously, I think Jerry Garcia is probably a better guitarist than the guy playing in that cover band, but there's also a band I like damn near as much as the Grateful Dead that plays Grateful Dead music that's called J-Rad, Joe Russo's Almost Dead, which happens to have a particular approach to the Grateful Dead that I like even more than some nights with the band. So leave that be. The point is the community isn't going anywhere, not least because where else in America, particularly in all the strange times and places that we've been through in the last few years, where else can you get this trusting, loving community that I think almost everybody really would like to take part in? If you find it, you're not likely to let it go. And that's a good place to transition to Wendy. So I'll give you a 1-minute introduction, not to Wendy because I don't know her well, but to Egypt. So the Grateful Dead, their manager had gone to, on vacation, had gone to Egypt and seen the pyramid, and also seen that right in front of the Great Pyramid at Cheops was a small sound and light theater, and they would run this, every night for the tourists. They'd have a light show, and you'd hear this voice saying, I'm the spirit of Cheops and blah, 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 blah. And he went, oh my God, we have to bring the band here. And long story short, and again, only, Grateful Dead lived on luck in some ways, because there was this brief period where Egypt was run in that time by a guy named Anwar Sadat, who, among other things, just at the time the Grateful Dead were playing there, was signing a peace treaty with Israel in Washington, with Jimmy Carter in Washington, D.C. So you can see that he had a little more openness than your average, than the current president of Egypt, for instance. So they managed to get to him. They found some adults that could actually talk to diplomats, and they ended up with Sadat, or with the Ministry of Culture, who's also, by the way, the head of their Secret Service, which I still find hard to process. But they managed to convince them that it would be very interesting to let the Grateful Dead play in Egypt, and they did. Naturally, being the Grateful Dead, the idea was that they would pay for this adventure, which was tremendously expensive at a time when they never, until late, this is 1978, until well into the 80s, they did not make large sums of money. But they were going to pay for it with a record, of course. They'd have a live record, live from Egypt. Well, they played badly. Their drummer had a broken wrist, so he was playing one-handed. Long story short, they ended up working extra shows for about 3 years to pay for their vacation. But they managed to play in front of the pyramids in the middle of a lunar eclipse. And if that doesn't, raise the hairs on the back of your neck for this, remembering that weird is not a negative adjective, this can't get any weirder. You get it. Wendy?
Thanks, Dennis. That was great. So hi, everybody. I've been a Deadhead since 1967. My first concert was at Cafe A Go-Go in New York City sometime in June. 1967 is an interesting year in Dead history as there's not a lot of records of some of the concerts that happened. And I do want to preface everything by saying I was not aware when I was participating in this stuff that someone was going to ask me 50 years later to remember a set list or where a concert took place or what I wore. So we listened to lots of music in those days and we went to lots of concerts. And I have to say that probably some of my memories are because I've seen videos of them or I've heard the music afterwards. However, one thing that has always stayed with me, of course, is the Egypt concerts. So I was living in the Middle East at the time. I was part of a 2-year peacekeeping force that went to 5 different countries: Israel, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan. And for 2 years, we worked with small groups of people in villages throughout the countries to talk about promoting and pursuing peace. It was part of our funding came from this really interesting guy named Avi Natan, who was a pirate radio station guy from somewhere in the Mediterranean. He was one of the first Middle Eastern rock and roll stations, and he put up some of the money for this. And we were a very multicultural, religious group of people. And for 2 years, we had this mission, and we failed miserably. And it was the beginning of August, and they said the funding was gone. We could stay where we were, or they would give us a ticket home, and that was the end. And then we heard the Dead was coming to Egypt. So there we were. We were in Israel. That was our home base in Israel. But there was a problem. You could not go to Egypt. You could not enter Egypt if you had an Israel visa on your passport. And not only do we have an Israel visa, many of us had passports that were initiated in Israel. So we all went to Cyprus and we all reported our passports stolen. And we hung out in Cyprus until they were able to replace our passports, which enabled us to go to Egypt and be part of the concerts. So that whole, getting there already was just so incredible and so exciting. So I will echo some of the things that Dennis said, not musically the best. Certainly there were some magic moments. For us, here we were after 2 years dealing with all kinds of people in the Middle East, seeing at the back of the area that was lit where the audience stood to see all the Bedouins sort of lined up. And these are people that we had been communicating with for a really long time. And never in the 2 years had any of us thought to communicate to them with Grateful Dead music. We had certainly tried to communicate with other things, but it was incredible to see that. It was incredible to see that when you stepped out of the area that was the sound and light show, the whole concept of complete and total darkness never existed for me with space. I've been in complete and total darkness, but it's usually been silent. So here I was in complete and total darkness, 30 feet away from where the lights illuminated, listening to this really wild drumming stuff and space and being in this place with stars above. And it was just incredible. The last night was the lunar eclipse. And you were standing, so the pyramid and the Sphinx all lined up. I know there's a story that Jerry levitated the pyramid, and when someone called him on it, he said, well, you just weren't looking. I guess I didn't see that happen either. I didn't see Timothy Leary levitate the Pentagon either. I guess I missed that one too, although I was there. So I guess I'm not good at watching for levitation. But the most amazing thing was when the whole thing was over, as we were leaving Egypt, and we could go directly from Egypt to Israel. We didn't have to go via Cyprus. We got a call saying peace had been achieved, something that for 2 years we worked for and failed so miserably at. And we're going home, completely defeated. And then we go to this concert and everything aligns. And all of a sudden, now there's a peace agreement. So I guess that's my claim to fame, this cool Egypt story. One of the things I loved the best was when they brought up Hamza Eldin to play with the drummers and that whole thing. A lot is lost because a lot of those tapes just, I think that, what they put together, 2 of the days only had a few of the, a few hours of the music that they had. But what I remember more than anything else was this feeling. I've always been Jewishly turned on and Jewishly connected. And I've had spiritual experiences before that were connected to Jewish events and Jewish things. I never in my life had a secular spiritual experience until the night of the lunar eclipse and being there. There was just something that elevated what was going on in your head and in your heart and what you thought and what you believed and how you connected to the people around you. And the sense of community and the sense of alignment and the sense of something bigger than ourselves led to this feeling of spirituality. And I think that that's something that I take away from that experience. And I try and bring a little bit of that to every show that I go to.
At the highest level, I think you'd find a lot of deadheads who would say that they would try to do that with every show. But something as stupendous as all that and just being in front of the pyramid, okay, that's a really good start to a spiritual experience, and the music you love and so forth. And I'll just add, and I might add, 5 gold stars in particular to Mickey Hart, who's the drummer of the Grateful Dead, who by far was the most open to. He studied with Ala Raka, who was the great tabla player who backed Ravi Shankar.
Ali Akbar, right?
Also, was it the concert for Bangladesh? Ali Raka.
We were, I forget. Well, that was in
Yeah,
St. Louis.
Ali Akbar, and also when
No,
Ali
Ali
Akbar
Akbar
died.
Khan was a Sarod player who
Right.
also came to the Bay Area. But as a drummer, Mickey studied with Ala Raka, and who, as I say, who backed Ravi Shankar at both Monterey and then at Woodstock, which really, and to a fairly substantial degree, introduced Indian music to Americans. And then later, I was along for that adventure. We went and recorded the Gyoto monks, who are these monks from Tibet, who can literally sing a chord. Now, the human throat cannot sing a chord. That's 3 notes, 1 throat. It's a yogic thing. They actually can do it. I mean, I was there when they were recorded doing it. And it's extraordinary. I mean, it sounds like you're standing at the gates of heaven. It's quite extraordinary. And so anyway, Mickey had met a man named Hamza Al-Din, who was from Nubia. Nubia is what's in between. It's not a country, but it was an ethnic group that's which very south Egypt and very north Ethiopia is the district that was once back in biblical times was known as Nubia. And he played the tar, which is a drum, it's a frame hand drum. It's a tambourine, but without the jangles. So it's, and the lute, pardon me, the oud, which was a type of lute. It's a stringed instrument. And brilliant. And after Egypt, as a matter of fact, Mickey went with Hamza to his native village in Nubia. But that third night, the second, they played a regular Grateful Dead set, the first set. And then the eclipse starts, right? So everybody's, looking at the moon. And Hamza and people from a drum school that he had some connection with in Cairo came out, and you hear this very soft desert rhythmic drumming, and and then one by one the members of the Grateful Dead came on and joined them, and it sort of imperceptibly dissolved from this desert drumming into the Grateful Dead playing a song called Fire on the Mountain, as the moon is going away. And I might add that the Bedouins out in the behind the audience were doing what they normally do during eclipses, which is making their own noises, yelling and shaking cans with stones in them, shaking rattles as a way of making sure the moon comes back. What Wendy said, I mean, it's just, I can't imagine a more astonishing experience. And I'm going to give you a very short version of my most astonishing experience with the Grateful Dead. And then I really would like everybody to unmute or at least to if you have questions or comments or whatever, but let's, please participate. But my great moment with the Grateful Dead, and I'd rather have been in Egypt, but I found out about Egypt the day after the first show, when it was in the San Francisco Chronicle. I wasn't plugged in. I didn't know about it, and I certainly wasn't in the Near East. My story was we did what we called the high altitude tour. We played Denver and then Telluride, Colorado, which is like, the stage was at 9,000 feet. And then down to Phoenix, and then Park City, Utah, and up in the Sierra Nevada of California. And it was the show in Telluride was a daytime show. So we headed out, it was like 5 o'clock. And because it was at such a very high altitude, instead of being in our normal, and this really is relevant, instead of being in our normal plushy corporate jet where everybody looked in, because of course you were so rich, you didn't have to look out. We were in this very bizarre plane, which it looked like a DC-3 from 1938. It was one seat on each side of the aisle. It looked like a cigar. And one on each side of the aisle. So everybody had a window, and so you wanted to look out. So we get up in the air and we're heading, visualize Telluride, Colorado, which is way western Colorado, going pretty much straight due south to Phoenix, Arizona, and a little southwest. And we get up in the air, and the pilot comes on, and of course everybody, it's Miller time, everybody's relaxed. Many joints have been smoked in the bus on the way to the plane, and the beers were out in the plane. And the pilot comes on and he says, "Do you guys want to get straight to Phoenix, or do you want to be tourists?" You can guess what this bunch said. And they said, "Tourists. Would you like to go to the Black Canyon of the Gunnison or Monument Valley?" Monument Valley, instant consensus. So again, you've seen pictures of Monument Valley. Half the car commercials you ever saw were shot in Monument Valley, or Back to the Future, or whatever. And so it's this completely magnificent valley with these giant buttes rising out of it. And there's a couple that are called the Mittens, because they have there's big butte and then a little sticky out thing at the bottom. Those buttes rise 2,000 feet above the valley floor. And he peeled off, and we went into the valley at 1,000 feet. So there's God's best handiwork above us and below. And she was on a good day. I'm telling you, this is just as beautiful a thing as I've ever seen. And it was just near sunset. So this is all sandstone, and it just bleeds color in that kind of light. I was reasonably straight, certainly not psychedelicized, but it was the psychedelic thing. And just to top it off, 2 stops back, Mickey had purchased a boa constrictor, which was on the floor of the plane, and occasionally touching people's feet and either scaring the snot out of them or leaving some snot on their shoes. Mickey's son, who was then about 7, is in the pilot's lap, and he swears he's flying the plane. And in the back, Garcia is giving a film history lecture about Monument Valley, which is very famous. There's a guy named John Ford, director of Stagecoach and a lot of very famous TV Western, now TV, but Westerns from the 30s that it introduced Monument Valley to the rest of America, the geography of it. So it it was altogether completely bizarre in the best sense, and as Wendy expressed, you know, something I'll be that I knew I could only, well, I mean, how many times do you get a chance to be in a private plane flying through Monument Valley, for starters? I mean, that was luck, beyond luck of the draw. That's but that's kind of sort of what it was like being around them almost all the time, at least, you know, if you were clear-minded enough and happy enough to see it, shall we say. So that's their peculiar magic. And I know your class has a while to go. So, and God knows, between Robert and Wendy and I, you have heard enough. So I hope you have questions or comments or whatever's.
And thank you, Dennis. And superb job. Wendy has a minute of something to say about the Grateful Dead Passovers she's been running for several years. And I still have 10 or 12 hours of stuff to say. Just, like, we haven't, you know, we've only talked about really Jerry and briefly Mickey. There's
Lots more.
Thank you. So go ahead.
Can I screen share? Can you set that up?
Sure. And just touch on that, and then we'll take questions, and I'll go back to muting myself.
Okay, gotta let me screen share first. Not yet. You have to enable me to be able to screen share.
The lighting technical crew is on it.
Okay. So the story went that the Dead used to play Nassau Coliseum all around the Jewish holidays, Passover and Rosh Hashanah, because they used to go to Mickey Hart's family's house, and that's how Phil got turned on to the Seder, and that's the story that everybody used to tell. However, what I really think is that Phil's kids went to a Waldorf school, and they did a Seder in the Waldorf school, and it was very intriguing to him. So in 2015, people approached him and asked if they could do a Passover Seder. And they did a small little Passover Seder at Terrapin Crossroads. At that point in time, my son Ezra had begun to play with Phil. Phil did recreation tours in honor of the 50th. He started with tours in 1965, recreated a concert, and went all the way through to 1995. And my son was the drummer for all of those, except for one when he had to come home for Passover. So this was the initial Haggadah that we did, the Passover book that we did. We had our own Grateful Dead Seder plate. And as you can see, we took a lot of imagery from Grateful Dead stuff. Here's Phil lighting the candles at one of the Seders, our version of the 10 plagues. We have the 4 questions. We have a Deadhead version of the 4 questions. You know, 4 questions are supposed to be asked so that they can be understood by everyone. So we have them in a variety of different ways on this page, different languages and Klingon. And we have our Deadhead version, which are, why can't we eat veggie burritos? Will I be miracled? Will they play the wheel? And will Phil sing? And here are some great pictures from the Seder at Terrapin Crossroads. Initially, we had it indoors, which only allowed about 120 people to attend. We did 2 nights. Tickets sold out in about 3 minutes. So this is one of my favorite. This is, you know, if your cup be full, may it be again. This is our version of the Last Supper. And then afterwards, there is a wonderful concert with a lot of the Jewish jam band musicians. This is my son up here with Phil and the drummer, Ezra. Ezra is the drummer for ALO, Animal Liberation Orchestra. You can check him out there, and he plays with Phil very often with Phil and Friends. And then the Seder got even bigger and bigger, and we moved to the outdoor venue where we did in 2019 2 different Seders for 450 people each night. Again, they sold out really quickly, and it was just a wonderful time. We got to the point where we even made Grateful Dead yarmulkes, including Phil's, which is with the words of Unbroken Chain as part of the design. This was the last Seder crew. Lebo, you might know. This is my son Ezra, Scott Law, Scott Guberman, and the rest are Jeanette Ferber, and the rest are committee members. There's a committee that does the Seder. And then 2020 came about and we couldn't be in person. So we created a Seder in place and we did it online. We had Phil for his first Zoom experience. He looks a little weird. He didn't quite get the background. And I'm sure you've seen many pictures of Phil playing before, but I bet you never saw one with him wearing a yarmulke. So this is sort of a rare picture. He has Ezra and Phil. And the Haggadah is available and all our stuff. If you go to tinyurl.com, Passover goodie bag, you can find all this. This year, we also did a Purim spiel, which is a Purim, the telling of the book of Esther with the Grateful Dead thing. And then this year, our Seder in place was wonderful. And this was our afikoman. Every once in a while, we put Jerry into the picture and you had to find him, take a picture of it and get back to us. We added some Grateful Dead Seder symbols, including an unbroken chain. And we can share the matzah, we can share the wine. And this was our Seder this year. Again, on Zoom with lots of new people. And that's it. So we invite you to be part of any of the really cool stuff that we do. Seder isn't only for Jewish people. We have tons of people that participate. If you want to be part of it, you get to read a part and you get to be on the Zoom. We had 11 different musicians playing throughout the Seder. And then we were on Facebook. We had about 48,000 people that watched the Seder in the 2 iterations of it. And then if you're on Zoom, you get to stay for the after party when the musicians hang out and they play more music. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I was at the last 2, and I also broke matzah with you at your house. Thank you. Superb. Let us take questions.
One last thing, anybody who's in Massachusetts and needs a Grateful Dead Seder, connect with me and you're more than welcome to come to our home. And I'll put my email in the chat.
That's what it's all about in the Grateful Dead family. So thank you. Thank you, Dennis, for staying to take questions. David, you are you're the gatekeeper. So let's plug David in. Do you have, do we?
Live.
Oh, you can speak? Okay, good. Perfect.
Would you like people to raise their hands using the reactions or?
Sure. And let me just say again, I still have lots of stuff to say that has not been touched on about the dead, the past, who they were, the effects, the after effects, the cultural changes. So let's just keep them short questions just for Dennis now. I am happy to stay after, but let's do short, brief, succinct Dennis questions because Dennis has been awesome and he's got things to do in San Francisco.
So I have half an hour, but so, you know, about 10 of 1 my time, I gotta get ready for another conversation. But anyway.
Yes, and but I still have my ton of stuff to say in that same half hour that we've got.
Okay.
So
we have Jeffrey Lewis.
anyway.
Jeffrey Lewis with a question.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Robert. This has been great. Dennis, it's always a treat to hear you. And Wendy, as I put in the chat, I've used your Haggadah year after year. It's terrific. It's a blessing to meet you all. I had a question about the politics of the Grateful Dead, and I have a theory about this. They never really thought of themselves. Well, my question is, did they think of themselves as political activists too? Because while many people say they weren't outwardly political, whatever that means, they always showed up at all the right places. I mean, if you had an anti-war demonstration in San Francisco, your band would be the Grateful Dead. If there were a women's rights demonstration, you know, any sort of gathering. Susan and I went to some Barack Obama concerts as well. So it seems that they always had their hand in politics, but they didn't really consider themselves political.
As individuals, they were all political, including Jerry. You have to make a distinction between the individual people and what the Grateful Dead was. The Grateful Dead was this thing. And Jerry felt very, very strongly that this thing should be separate from politics, should be above politics, should be above almost everything, and just be what it was, which was a music making thing. the Barack Obama concert, with all, great respect for Barack and for Jerry both, but if Jerry had been alive, it probably wouldn't have happened, and not in that way, not as a formal Grateful Dead supporting a political candidate. Jerry voted for Lyndon Johnson in 1964 against Barry Goldwater. And what did he get? He got the Vietnam War. He swore that he would never vote again and didn't. I disagree with him, but that's, who gives a rat's butt about that? But the fact is that he and the only time that the Grateful Dead put their name as an overt political act was for the Rainforest concert in 1988. And Garcia's comment was, this isn't about politics, this is about global survival. And he was quite right. And I was, it was great that we did that. And we played a benefit concert, and we went to the United Nations and went to testified in front of Congress and did all this stuff. So, but as I say, you have to be clear that the Grateful Dead, well, it was a number of things. It was everybody in the room at a concert. And I mean everybody, including the guy selling hot dogs in the back who's listening to a Red Sox game and not paying any attention to the concert at all. And you're talking about this sort of drag, it was sometimes referred to jokingly as a dragon, this mythical beast that, that was. So this, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Or at least it confuses it more sophisticatedly. Somebody else?
Don't be shy.
There is silence. I will fill it. And Dennis, if you would like to stay, you're cordially invited. And thank you so much. And when I see you in the city, as we call San Francisco, an excellent dinner is on me. And if you've got a copy of your book that has an autograph in it, I am happy to send you a check for it.
No, the way to do that is to buy the book and send it to me, and I'll sign it for you.
Okay.
Smart man. I have a question for you, Dennis. For those of us who have stayed around, my first show was in the 70s, 1970, but here we are in whatever year we're up to now, and we'll see music again. And we see Bob Weir out there with Wolfbro, and we see, Phil still doing things up at Terrapin Crossroads and hopefully back at the Capitol Theater. Give us a sense of the vibrancy going on now. I'm like blown away to see their energy and continued commitment to the music. So give us a little bit of the 2021.
Well, certainly, as referring to the musicians, people say, "Oh, it's amazing that they're still playing," and it's like, the hell else do they have to do? It's sort of my comment. If Bobby had to stay home and mow the lawn, well, he doesn't have a lawn. It's a hillside home, but he'd go bananas. So the fact is that Phil has lightened up, but it's a 2-mile drive from his house to Terrapin, and he gets to play music with really wonderful young players. Again, it's like it's not so amazing. The hard part of being in a rock and roll band, almost anyone will tell you who's experienced it, is the travel. If you could magically just teleport from stage to stage and go home to your own bed every night, what's to complain about? Which was, in fact, the original theory that various people misled Weir with, what he built TRI Studio, which stands for Tamalpais Research Institute. He lives on the side of Mount Tamalpais, which is this 3,000-foot hill. It's not quite a mountain, that overlooks Marin County and really the San Francisco Bay Area. And the idea was that, he was just going to do, this is 10 years ago now, that he was going to stop touring and do, and play from TRI, which as I told him at the time, the fact is that he was ahead of his time, and even now in where most of us can probably get a pretty darn good feed for streaming, the technology has largely caught up with that vision. But realistically, if you're interested in making money as a touring musician, you still have to go to where the people are, which is to say, you have to tour. But that again, and Weir has put together Wolf Brothers and likes it very much, especially now that he's added, and I like it better now that he's added Jeff and the pedal steel player whose name right now escapes me, but who's brilliant. Mickey just did a thing with Zakir Hussain about sound, which I didn't catch, but he's as busy as ever and as active as ever. And in early May, streaming only, I already had a reporter try and get into the show, and they said, well, we're not going to have any audience, so sorry. But Billy Kreutzmann is doing 3 nights from Kauai with Billy and the Kids, his side band, which includes Tom Hamilton from J-Ride, and it's quite good. And Billy Strings, and if you don't know about Billy Strings, you oughta, because this is this frightening boy child. I mean, I say boy child, he must be in his 20s, but he really does look in his teens. I mean, he just happens to have a very baby face, and he is a genius guitarist, mostly acoustic. I don't know if he's played electric or not. I've only seen him with acoustic. Just jaw-droppingly brilliant. So there's Billy, and they, and I know that they've already scheduled Dead and Company for January, I think it is, in Mexico. So it's about as vibrant as you can get, and it's so far beyond those 4 guys and their related circles. I mean, it's J-Rad and it's Dark Star Orchestra, and it's, I'm involved with something called Skull and Roses, which is a collection of Dead cover bands. We don't use the word cover band. Bands playing Dead music, which this year will feature Dark Star Orchestra, among others, in Ventura in April. So we missed this year and last, of course, and so we'll resume in 2022. So if you want to seriously overdose on Grateful Dead music, stop on by. So Bruce Hornsby said that Grateful Dead songs were like hymns. By that he meant that they were as much a part of the American subconscious and culture as what we grew up hearing in church on Sunday.
Comment if I may. So Phil did say about that it's Electric Church, and Jimi Hendrix also referred to his music exactly the same as Electric Church. Amongst the other 500 topics is the wall of sound that we could discuss. I did want to say for people that besides being, because I've sent this group like 30 or so emails already, but on XM Sirius Radio, if you get it, there's a dedicated Grateful Dead channel. There's also another channel called Jam On. And if you just go to YouTube, there's an infinity amount of Grateful Dead music.
Sure is.
Let's see,
archive.org.
Yeah.
And then there's Wolfgang's Vault, which is the Bill Graham stuff that was under litigation and has now been free to listen and download to.
There was no shortage. I did want to talk briefly about some of the effects of the Grateful Dead universe. When Bear, Augustus Stanley Owsley III, whose father was the governor of Kentucky, I believe, who depending on what thing I've read, either made 1.5 million hits of LSD or 5 million hits of LSD. Of course, only when it was legal, certainly. He was very much into the sound quality, which of course the Dead, because the Dead and you were one. You were part of the show and the Dead were there for you to make the experience happen. So there was a very interesting article I read. They were playing, I think, in 1970 in St. Louis at the Fox Theater, and they'd been busted down on Bourbon Street. So Owsley was in jail with their sound equipment, and they needed to go to perform, but they didn't have equipment. So they contracted Bob Heil, H-E-I-L, who I believe later made the Heil Air Motion Transformer speakers. And they said, we've heard you have speakers. And he'd been given the speakers to one of the old theaters there, where he actually had been playing the organ in the theater since he was 15. And Garcia called Bob Heil and said, we need your help. So Bob Heil's assistants were Deadheads, and they moved their giant speakers to the theater. And that was the first night, according to what I read, that the Dead actually had like the ultra quality stuff for sound. Then Bear, Owsley, as he was known, got together with people like at Stanford Research Institute doing acoustical studies. And that is how they made, and I think we have a picture of it, but here's a rough drawing of the wall of sound. So when I saw the Dead at the Hollywood Bowl in '74, this was 75 tons of speaker equipment, 3 stories high. So when the Beatles played Shea Stadium, the sound quality was garbage because you didn't need good quality to go hear them say, and now at third base we have this. So Owsley and the Dead were the people who changed it, so that when you go to a concert today and you hear great music and you can hear what's going on, that is because of the Grateful Dead. So one of the guys who worked with Bob Heil made those noise canceling headphones, which he sold to NASA. So, and I'm sure that technology is also in the Bose headphones that you have when you fly. Also, one of the people that worked for him, or somewhere in this giant loop of people, made the THX movie sound system. So when you go to the movie and you see that silvery THX, the audience is listening and all the sound effects go around the room, that is also because of people that were working with the Dead. Regarding the benefits they did, the Dead started something called the Rex Foundation, which is run by people who are friends of the Dead. So they're not soliciting advice for, give us money for our charity. They're already well enough connected, but having these benefit concerts, including for, I think it was the Lithuanian basketball team for the Olympics, the Dead supported this. And so their outfit included some tie-dye stuff. So the Dead, and that's one of 20 things I have on one list of what the Dead have done as a lasting influence on culture. And let us not forget the line in the Eagles song, I saw a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. The stuff about the Dead, I mean, I know Wendy because of Jam Cruise, because unlike, like if you travel in your 20s in Europe, you'd meet other people and it was easy to make friends because all of you were in your 20s from all over. And if you go to a fancy hotel now as an adult, you're not going to be making friends with people because that warm, friendly, come stranger, sit and join my table doesn't happen in the regular world, but the Dead world is accepting and open. And a big thing about the music is, Jerry said, and the Dead said, and they learned this from the acid tests, it's okay to make a mistake. The Dead were also influential with tapers. This is a big important thing. So pardon me while I go on this for a minute. People were recording the Dead since their early days in concerts, and they would give the tapes away. And management at Warner Brothers said, this is a bad idea. You're giving the tapes away. People won't come if they can hear you on a tape. They're not going to come see you live. Jerry said, when we're done, if people want the music, they can have it. We're done with it. So people would go and record Grateful Dead concerts. And I remember seeing hundreds of these. And Susan apparently has quite her own little stash of Grateful Dead tapes, and you had to trade them for free. You could not sell a tape. You could trade it or give it away. And this is how, as Jerry said, that this is how you made your community, the people that come to the concert. And if you saw the Dead 2 nights in your town, but you missed the third, it was the third night that they played Sugar Lee and Uncle John's band. And I want to point out, we have listened to 1 second of the Dead. But they would then do the 28-minute version of Dark Star, and you weren't there that night. And then you'd go, I have to go to all of them next time. And this is how the Dead, to this day, are making, to the old days, we're making new fans by listen to this. And no concert was the same, as you said, Dennis. Everything was different, and every version, if there were 400 versions of Sugar Ray, it was different every time. And by just other trivia for the beginning part that I skipped, the Dead played, I think, 2,316 shows, and they had about 400 cover songs and about 180 songs of their own. And everything from Otis Redding to the Rascals to old blues from the 20s, they would do, and every show was different. Back to everybody else.
Mr. McNally, thank you for participating. Bruce Grunwald, Medford, Massachusetts. I was curious, did the Grateful Dead ever cross paths with Miles Davis in any way, shape, or form? Thank you.
That was a great night. So in 1970, Miles signed with Columbia Records, and Clive Davis said, you really should expand your audience and reach out to the kids. You should play at the Fillmore Auditorium, Fillmore East and Fillmore West. So he played at Fillmore East, and he was supposed to open for Steve Miller. And he heard Steve Miller, and he decided he did not respect Steve Miller as a musician. So Miles did what Miles would do, which is he simply didn't show. And as a result, Bill had to put Steve Miller on first because, there was no other option. So Miles finished the show. Then he got to San Francisco, and he was opening for the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead were smart enough and realistic enough to be incredibly embarrassed by this. But, they just sort of, well, that's the way it is. And somehow Jerry in particular, and Phil got into a very serious discussion with Miles about all this. And if you ever want to know the number of different ways that you can use, you'll all pardon my language, the word motherfucker in the English language, read Miles Davis's autobiography. It's called Miles, and it's written with a guy named Quincy Troop. And he talks about how he found them interesting, intelligent. He didn't say anything about their music, but this was Miles, the Bitches Brew band. So he had, Mickey was going bananas because Ayrton Morea was in that band, and he's like drumming on the stage. And there's, they all, as I say, they were all going, Miles is opening for us. This is absurd. But, that was the way it worked. And they had a good time with it. So yes. So that's how they ran across Miles.
Thanks so much.
And the Dead played with a lot of jazz people over the years. And
over time, played with just about everybody, The worst was Chuck Berry, who unfortunately by 1995, Chuck was not exactly what Chuck had been. And let's just say that it was a outdoor show, and everybody got excited. There was something special about this legend of the 50s with the Grateful Dead. And so everybody, everybody was like in front of the stage, when Chuck kicked off, and he was terrible. And so the second day, it was very noticeable that not a quarter of the number of people that had been there for the opening of the show came back, was in front of the stage at the start of the show the second day, because it was greatly disappointing. Anybody else?
Yes. I'm just wondering, what was the most rewarding part of working with the Dead for you? And what was the most problematic, if there was anything that was really problematic? And what was the most rewarding part for you?
The feeling of being, part of something much larger than myself. That I was, Jerry's expression was to serve the music, and he tried to do that. Although when you asked him, are you trying to be transcendent? Are you trying to move the world? Are you trying to be cosmic? And he said, man, I'm trying to stay in tune, which was a good response. I felt that the Grateful Dead was a force for good in the highest sense. You can take high any way you want. And that working for them was a good thing. As far as problematic, oh God, don't get me started. But it was a job. But just to name two things, and frankly, they were connected, at least at one point. Cocaine is a lousy drug to do when you're within 200 miles of another person, because it does no good for your sense of humor or your social responsibility. And the Grateful Dead's crew, because the band refused and couldn't take, just as an example, who got on the stage? Well, the band couldn't decide that. They were playing, they were a little busy. So they had to turn that responsibility over to the crew. And unfortunately, they were terrible at taking responsibility and sort of bossing. Jerry wouldn't boss. And so the end result was that there were times when when the crew, not so much in decisions, but in style, as in being just rude and obnoxious and unnecessarily so. They weren't always up to standard, shall we say. So, but and that included the way they treated each other and fellow employees, and that's disappointing. But we learned that came with the package.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I wanted to.
I see a hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that Jerry Garcia was also a part of the band Old and in the Way, which he was an excellent banjo player.
Yes, he was.
And that was quite a band.
It was, it was my great privilege, because I was an East Coast guy and they only did one East Coast tour. But it happens to be that the night I met Jerry was a night of a Old and in the Way show. I met him through a reporter guy that he knew. Jerry loved playing bluegrass. If he went east in 1964 with the notion that maybe he would try to work for Bill Monroe, and be a full-time banjo player, bluegrass player. And as a San Franciscan, went into the American South in 1964 and went, I don't think I can stay here, and went home. When you are a guy with a Latin last name, although his family was from Spain and Sweden, go figure, traveling with a Jewish guy in a car with California license plates across Mississippi during Freedom Summer, you get some looks.
Yeah.
And anyway, he decided that he was a place that had signs marked white and colored on drinking fountains and bathrooms. Nah, he went back to San Francisco.
Bill Monroe is a very testy guy.
Also,
Yeah.
very demanding. Very brilliant.
I've met Bill Monroe. I was at a party with him once, and he could be very nice, but he could also get very testy about
Oh,
things.
yeah.
He also did a great thing with Grisman on Miles covers. The great album that Jerry did.
So what?
Did Milestone, exactly. It was great stuff.
Jerry, in long story short, Jerry started hanging out with Grisman in the 90s. Grisman had a studio in his basement, and they'd smoke up a fat one and just play all afternoon. Some of his very best acoustic playing ever. And if you get a chance, it was all put out by Acoustic Disc, which was David's record label, own personal record label. It's good stuff.
Definitely.
And if you have grandchildren or children, I should mention for a plug that they put out an album called Not for Kids Only. Jerry didn't want to admit it, but it was at the time of Barney. I don't know if you remember Barney, the Purple Dinosaur. And Barney, they put out songs, and they were Baudelarized. They were censored versions of old classic folk songs, many of which had murder and incest and a lot of content that's not for prime time. And they censored it, and that infuriated him. So he and Grisman put out a kids music from two adults.
So I just wanted a couple of comments, if I could. First of all, Robert started with sort of a history of, the beats and how that bled into the 60s and bled into the Dead. There's a great movie out called The Source, if you can find it. It's not the James Michener The Source, but it really follows Allen Ginsberg and goes into that history and really ends up with Garcia and the Dead. Second, they played with so many different bands. It's amazing. I remember in the early 70s, the Allmans would show up and they would play together.
Yep.
They even played with the Beach Boys. And of course, you had mentioned that they played with The Who. But there are two other characteristics, including, in addition to the romantic paradigm and the improvisation, that I loved about these guys. One was their imperfections. I mean, they had, like you said, sometimes they flew and sometimes they bounced into the rocks. It was great when they bounced into the rocks, because they just kept playing and they got themselves up and moved on. And their humility. I remember once seeing a news conference and somebody asked, I think it was Phil or Bobby and Jerry, has success changed the Grateful Dead? This is one of my great moments with them. And they said, yeah, and they laughed. And the reporter pursued and said, no, really, has it? And Bobby said, yeah, it has. Those pistachio nuts that are really hard to open? I don't bother with those anymore, which I thought was a great line. And the last question I have for you, Dennis, is where are you from?
I'm an Army brat, so I'm not really from anywhere. I was born on a military fort in Maryland, grew up around, and ended up going to college in upstate New York and graduate school at UMass Amherst for 5 years. And then I saw San Francisco, and I've been from San Francisco for the last 35 years or something. Anyway, it's a pleasure, all of you. Be well. I do have to run because I gotta go to work in 6 minutes. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Dennis.
you.
I'll be in touch
Take
with you
care.
afterwards. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Hey, everyone. That was quite outstanding. I'm happy to stay. I have tons more stuff to share. Are there questions that I can answer? That we have music queued up, which we haven't listened to a note of music, but it's fine if we don't. And I have been working on this since January, so I have information and stories and articles, and I know I've sent you all about 25 articles or so, and links to music and stories about the wall of sound and the beats and everything else, just a fraction of what I've been taking in. But what can I do? Where would you like me to go? You can, as Jimi Hendrix said, you can leave when you want to. We're just jamming. But what other questions do you have for me or Wendy, or apparently a few others of you have seen the Grateful Dead a couple hundred times or have your own stories. So
Robert, could I just ask an attendance question? Will the person on the iPhone please identify him or herself? I can't get their attention through chat and I'm taking attendance. I'm wondering if it's Barbara, Joy, or Nancy.
okay. Whoever's on iPhone mode, please get back to David.
One person. Or-
Perfect.
And just shout it out.
Or text David. That's even better on chat for privacy. What would you like to know about? There are countless stories. One of my friends spent quite a lot of time with the dead. So he has, I think, two little things I'll share with you. When my friend Steve Benesh was talking with Jerry Garcia, Jerry told him, we need to find some high quality business weasels because it's a weasel world, meaning, referring to the people who work in the entertainment business. Steve Benesh told me that in 1989, he saw the dead, and Bear Owsley, the one who's making all the acid, and Tim Leary were having a dance-off on the stage. And one of the roadies for the dead is a guy named Big Steve, who has his own program on the Grateful Dead channel that's on, I believe, 3 times a week, or the same show 3 times and then a new one the next week. So 1981 New Year's Eve, Steve saw Big Steve at the finale singing the Bob Dylan song, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And he was crying because apparently his girlfriend, Big Steve's girlfriend, had died in a car accident on the way to the show. And Steve saying, it's all right, it's all over now, baby blue. Well, I have 4 more hours of stuff. What would you like to ask me or like me to cover regarding anything on the dead?
Hey, everyone. Hi, Robert.
Hello.
You
Hi,
put so much into this. And I know that unlike Jimi Hendrix, the dead were different territory for you.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, in all of what you've done, what were the things that struck you as, oh, really? Wow, kind of moments?
Well, I will say I've been a fan of Hendrix and the Dead since I was a kid. The Dead is not new territory. I think I first saw them in '74, but I did see them a number of times, but I didn't see them many times in Berkeley because they were playing the week before finals as if they had planned it. So this is not new
Understood.
territory.
Understood.
Yeah, so since like '70, I was listening. The difference in my doing the research on the Dead is it's 5 or 8 or 12 guys. I mean, depending on if you looked at, they had 4 different keyboardists. And the Dead had 30 years. If you go from 65, late 65, when they changed their name from the Warlocks to the Dead, being on STP and looking into Funkin' Wagnall's dictionary, and they go Grateful Dead, which in fact I should explain what that means. Until when Jerry died in the fall of 1995. So there was 30 years of Grateful Dead. So the volume of stuff is huge, whereas Jimi Hendrix really was the one guy with 4 years of fame. I think that with Jimi Hendrix, he stands as the best rock guitarist of the loud genre. I remember telling David many, many months ago, or even I think in the publicity for teaching this, I said, if you're interested in loud, burning guitar music, then take the Jimi Hendrix class, because the Dead, and now it's been 2 hours and we're finally getting to the opening paragraph. The Dead played Americana. They were Jerry and Phil, the bass player, and Bobby Weir, who was like a 16-year-old, what they were calling themselves in '65 was, and Pigpen, who we haven't even spoken of Pigpen yet, was Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions. They were a jug band in '64. Phil Lesh worked for the radio station KPFA in Berkeley, and he let Jerry Garcia come in and do some bluegrass, I don't know, like at midnight or something, some late hour when nobody else would really care. And that increased Jerry's exposure to a bigger audience, albeit not too big an audience. Oh, and they would play, Jerry Garcia would play this jug band music and banjo and stuff at Kepler's bookstore in Palo Alto. So when I was living in the Bay Area, again, back around 96 or so, I would hang out at Kepler's. I had sort of a life-changing thing happen at Kepler's. And I did not know until the last few months of reading all this that they were playing in the back room at Kepler's. Had no idea I was in such a famous place. So the difference with the Dead is the Dead have a lasting effect on the army of Deadheads, which is global. Hendrix's effect is that any boy who's been through puberty wants to play like Jimi Hendrix. The Dead have a culture around them. One of the things I was reading said, if you have a Deadhead sticker on your car or a Marine sticker on your car, and you pull over because you're having car trouble, someone will stop by within 10 minutes because they're either a Marine or they're a Deadhead. This stuff doesn't exist for the Hendrix world, other than like, wow, what a guitarist. The camaraderie, Wendy's Passover Seders and Purim. There's no Jimi Hendrix such thing.
But Robert, Jimi Hendrix was his tenure as a famous musician was so brief. Mm-hmm. He was gone before we knew it.
Right. So that's why you can just idolize the guy as an amazing guitarist who did all these things with feedback. And it's, again, so many things I didn't even have time to touch on in the Hendrix class. Maybe I should not be having guest speakers.
Yeah, I think I probably told you I saw him twice and he just blew me away.
Absolutely, yes. And as he would say, watch out for your ears.
It's interesting to me that community developed around the Dead, and it didn't develop around, we'll say, the Allmans or the Rolling Stones. And the newer version is the Fish community. Yeah. That is sort of like the next, generation kind of thing. But I've never quite understood how is it that Dead fans embrace this sense of being a community in a way that no other fans that I can think of did. Well, I mean, I chase Dylan as much as I chase the Dead and the Who and, like Crosby, Stills and Nash, but there never was the sense that there is with the Dead.
You did chase them?
That happened. Why do you think that happened? I was thinking about
say.
Say again, David. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Why do you think that a sense of community developed around the Dead? I was wondering about that too, as we were listening. So I was listening to Dennis, whatever. What's your theory about that?
I don't know. I've read a lot about it, and people seem to talk around it. They talk about once the community was formed, why that continued, but I'm not quite sure. Now the Dead is so much more mainstream than it ever was when I first started listening to it. It was not music that you heard on the radio, but you did hear the Rolling Stones on the radio. You did hear the Who on the radio. So maybe it was a sense of, we're our own thing. We don't have the prominence of other rock and roll bands and other experiences, but I don't know. It's a very interesting vibe. And even today, Dennis said, that there are kids today that are into the Dead as much as I am, and they were born 7 years after Jerry died, kind of thing.
I have
David, I have an idea about that, Bruce, here. I think that the commercial production value of a lot of bands such as the Who, the Rolling Stones, kind of eclipse I don't think they took themselves as seriously, perhaps. It was more genuine, more realistic, perhaps, in terms of the Grateful Dead.
So
That's
I have a theory. When the Dead were starting, late 65, early 66, the culture of San Francisco, which was sort of the whole beginning thing I was getting into with Kesey and the Pranksters, there was a sense of community. And one of the books I was reading, this one, the whole community, you knew people who lived in the Haight. There was a sense of community. There was also hitchhiking. I was thinking earlier about how I did some hitchhiking, like in Europe and in LA, but in LA as a kid, like no one hitchhikes anymore. The picking someone up if you're on your way to a Dead show, because you could spot another deadhead scraggly hippie with ease. It was easier to have a communal time. There wasn't, it was just a different time. No one hitchhikes now. And that's an example of what was in a cultural norm, which is now as obsolete as a phone booth.
Yeah, I did that.
Also, one more thing, David. When they finally had a top 10 hit, they never made it to number one, which was Touch of Grey. Things changed, and in the books I was reading, they started needing to play larger stadiums because there was a demand for those many tickets. They never wanted to play big places. They wanted to play small places to be intimate with the audience, because that wall of sound thing that weighed 75 tons was just too much of a burden to schlep around the country. Sorry, lost my train of thought. Anyway, sorry, lost it. So
I want to throw one more
Yeah.
comment on it too. That one of the things that I thought was always interesting and helped bring people to the Dead was there was not one style of music. Most of the other bands I listened to, you could define their music, but we went from bluegrass to space to reggae to, hardcore rock and roll in the course of one set, let alone, so I think that also people connected, not just because of the music, but the fact that maybe the music they listened to wasn't the most mainstream music. So we were all sort of the misfits in some ways.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in the old days, in the 50s and 60s, a song was 3 minutes maximum.
Right.
And that was sort of by law, as it were, on AM radio. The average Dead song in a concert, per what I read, was 9 minutes. And you're not going to get a 9-minute song when everybody else is playing 3-minute songs or 2.5, like a.
That's also an artifact of vinyl record engineering.
Absolutely.
You have to be
Correct.
very careful how you record on a vinyl.
Absolutely.
You have a certain amount of minutes and that's it.
Absolutely, on a 45, absolutely. But when
So
you're.
when I got, years ago, when I got a new car, one of the features were it had a cassette player. And when you put the cassette in, it would automatically move to another track. You can move it from track 1 to track 2 to track 3. It was really great. So I put a cassette in and I went to move it to another track and it didn't work. And I put another cassette in and it didn't work. So we brought it back to the dealer, who explained to me that my tapes only had one song on each side because they were Grateful Dead tapes.
Yeah.
That reminds me of what we did on our road trips as a family. So we would have arguments about who got to play what songs, and my kids would get to play their songs. So one song for each kid and one song for each parent. And so they would do a 3-minute song and I would do a 25 minutes. They finally caught on.
Going back to the phenomena of the community,
Yes.
I think that it was a confluence of a lot of things that were going on in the 60s. And this was before we had technology to communicate. There were the protests against the Vietnam War. There were the political aspects. There were a lot of unifying events that were happening that gave a singular voice to what was going on in this country. And there was no email, none of that. And yet across the country, there were events that were happening on a massive scale that hadn't been seen before. So when you, and I hadn't thought about this before, when you start to look at the Dead community, that, you know, they had their roadies that went around and their vans, and they had these parking lot camps and things like that. And I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, well, like Robert, it's gone.
Bob, in your research, did you find that the Grateful Dead had a base venue in California where they played a significant, was it Winterland or Fillmore West?
They played Winterland and Fillmore. They played a place in the Haight called the Straight Theater. Billy Kreutzmann, their drummer, just a second. One of the 15 books I read. So Bill, we didn't talk about the band members. We didn't talk about their writers. Oh, there is so much for the 30-hour Grateful Dead class. Send in your emails that it's time for the 30-hour Grateful Dead class. So Billy Kreutzmann, the first drummer, met up with Mickey Hart, who Dennis had spoken about at length. And he said, and was learning a lot of drumming stuff because Mickey was a better drummer than Billy. And he said, well, we're going to be doing these shows, come join us. So they were playing at, I believe it was the Straight Theater in probably 66. And they gathered together some drum, equipment, and Mickey played. And at the end, Jerry said, okay, you're in the band. I mean, I don't even know that he asked, but they said, okay, you're in the band. So the places like Winterland, Fillmore, those were big places where they played often. And in LA, they played at the Shrine Auditorium, which is where I got sworn in to be a lawyer. They played in San Bernardino when there's nothing in San Bernardino. Oh, which reminds me, there's some reference in these things to, maybe it's in Bill Kreutzmann's book, that they had the Bakersfield Sound. They played a lot of Merle Haggard stuff, a lot of country-ish things like, I think Me and My Uncle was written by Phillips from Mamas and the Papas, but someone help me out. What's some of the Merle Haggard stuff? Mama Tried, which was a Dead classic, but they sang a lot of this Me and My Uncle, Me and Bobby McGee.
Sing Me Back Home.
Right.
Yeah, lots of country-ish stuff. So as Billy called it, I believe they're Bakersfield Sound. So their roots were wide. They were, I think on the Europe trip, yes, something I read somewhere said on the Europe trip, they were doing LSD every day. Every day, it said. So Pigpen, however, did not do acid. Apparently he was dosed once or twice, and he was very upset that he was given acid because he was into drinking, which is how he died in 73. But for those of you that are not familiar with the music, and even yesterday I sent some stuff of the Dead with the Beach Boys, which I trust all of you have gotten that. And there's a closing song of like 18 minutes or something with Pigpen doing whichever song it is, whether it's Turn On Your Love Light or any of these, pardon me? Yeah, Too Hard to Handle, which, jot this down, Otis Redding at Monterey, so it's on the movie and on the album of Otis Redding, does a song called Hot to Handle. And Pigpen, who was raised as a white guy who looked like a biker, and he was called Pigpen because of the Peanuts character who was always dirty and messy, so they called him Pigpen or Pig, and that was fine with everybody. So Pigpen does amazing versions of Hot to Handle. So if you are interested, Hard to Handle. Thank you, my sound and lighting director. So if you want to listen to Otis Redding doing Hard to Handle, who's true R&B and soul, with the backing guys who backed Booker T, backing him at Monterey, to a Dead version pre-73. Pigpen died in 73. He was on the Europe tour. 72 was like his last time with the band. Hard to Handle, and you can just hear the blues and R&B. Pigpen was white, his dad was white. I think his dad was an engineer, and but also played on the black radio station, as it was called then, in San Francisco, playing R&B. So Pigpen was raised, immersed in 1940s and 50s R&B, and that's why he was with Jerry sort of the lead impetus and the lead singer behind the Dead as a blues band, which is what they were a lot through 72. And then when he passed away in 73, the Dead kept going because there were a million places to go. Again, touring with Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, The Who. So the world was their oyster, and they, they changed technology. Another important thing the Dead did. You might remember when you used to buy tickets, you'd go to a company like Ticketmaster or someone like that and buy the ticket. So Ticketmaster would take their money and then the band would get its cut. And the Dead said, we don't see a need for this. We're selling out. We don't need any help at all. And I think in their first album, the Dead said, who are you? Where are you? Let us know, send us information. And they gave an address in the San Francisco area. So they had the first mailing list in probably 1967, 1968 or so. And so from around the country, people were sending them their contact information because of course, no internet. And then there were Grateful Dead newsletters. So they got away with the middleman of companies selling their tickets. It said, we're selling tickets ourselves. We don't need a middleman to take money out. We can do it ourselves. They also had their own record label, which also meant more money to them. So lots of innovative things the Dead did. In fact, having your writing copyright, your writer's artist rights gives you lots of money because a lot of money comes into rock and roll bands and singers from the singers who write the songs. So that's also an important thing. And they were very good at doing this. And so they changed music. And
well, the biggest thing was giving away the music. That was unheard of.
Yes.
That you could tape the music. They had a taper section that was unheard of.
Yeah.
And they convinced the record companies that it would not affect the sale of their records. And the bottom line is you bought the studio version and then you got every tape you could get anyway because each one was completely different.
Right. And they weren't always that good quality. Third, fourth, fifth generation were lousy fidelity. And so
well, you had
now,
to find someone who got it off the soundboard.
if you were you, but not, yeah. And so they also had like Dick's Picks. They have their own special albums. Limited printing used to be 15,000, and now I think it's 20 or 21,000. And
so
that
part of those have to do with Bill Graham and the lawsuit. So when Bill Graham died, all the stuff that was in his warehouse was under litigation for years and years and years. And they finally settled it about 10 or 15 years ago. And then they were able to release a lot of the Fillmore tapes and a lot of the Winter Garden tapes and things like that. So that's why there's been more of these albums that have come out under Dick's Picks and under different names as well. You can go on there and not only can you download stuff and listen, but they do have Lost Leader posters and stuff still that were in the warehouses that are for sale.
I'm going to spend a minute because we're still taping, and I know that it's 4:20 in case 4:20 has any significance to anybody. But to make my life easier, I will send out a bibliography, but because this is all going to go on YouTube, as you all know, I'm going to spend a minute and help everyone who watches this in the future with the bibliography. So here are some of the books that I used. A lot of stuff was online. And I'll tell you, if you look up the biographies on Wikipedia of the two co-writers of John Perry Barlow and Robert Hunter, their biographies on Wikipedia are fascinating. So bear with me a second. Here's some of the books I used as a reference. Okay, that's The Grateful Dead by Peter Richardson. Deal by Bill Kreutzmann, who was the drummer for the Dead, is the drummer, well, was. Grateful Dead lyrics. This is the 50th anniversary, Grateful Dead lyrics. Marketing lessons from the Grateful Dead. Three CD set in case you're in business school. This book by Charles Perry. I found a mistake in there. In this book on Haight-Ashbury, which was really, really good about the Red Dog Saloon and the early days and Kreutzmann, one of the mistakes is it says, just for the record, I don't know if Charles Perry's still alive, didn't have time in 5 months to look him up, but he's talking about, on page 13, the pranksters the pranksters counted a real underground celebrity among their number. He was Neil Cassidy, the legendary prototype of Jaffe Ryder and Jack Kerouac's beat novel On the Road. Incorrect. Jaffe Ryder is in the Dharma Bums, not On the Road. Thank you. Correction, please. This book, Deadheads by Linda Kelly. And last but not least, this book has every damn thing in it, except it's old at this point. The Dead by Oliver Traeger. Basically everybody, every song, best versions of songs, who wrote what. It's quite comprehensive. And there are another, scores of books also including our guest's book, Long Strange Trip by Dennis McNally. Anything I can do for the rest of you wonderful people? I see two things in the chat. Let's see if it's for me. Like, dude, you're way over time, but that is okay. Thank you, Susan. And anything else to wrap up? I will tell you, I worked on this, like I said, in the Jimi Hendrix thing for months, immersing myself. I had so many dreams of the Grateful Dead. Seriously, last night I had a very when you're focusing, it happens. I didn't know how
Kathleen, you got to get him out of the house, Kathleen.
Thank you for the light and sound. So I'm glad, all this stuff just swims in my head. I cared about these bands since I was a kid. Music is one of my main passions. It was great to learn all this stuff. I got a page of notes on John Barry Barlow and in 2-point handwriting. There's just so much. I hardly covered what I wanted to cover, but I am happy. I'm thrilled with how good this went. And I look forward to having all of you come over with your masks and let's all hang out and use the outside speakers and listen to the Dead. You all did superbly. I thank all of you. Thank you, Wendy. You all did great. I look forward to seeing you in person, everybody. Thank you so much for a wonderful discourse on the Grateful Dead. And there's dozens of hours of stuff left to cover that I did not even begin to talk about. So thanks.
Adios.
You all did great. Thank you. Thank you. See y'all later. Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Adios.
I'll have to find out who the iPhone is to give you credit.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great time. Bye-bye.
I'm hanging in there for iPhone.